And for those that don't know, Stockholm had the highest number of unicorns per capita outside of Silicon Valley. So you're talking about Spotify King, iZettle, some of the unicorns coming out of there. So thank you for joining us today, Per.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Great. So can you share a little bit more about Sting?
Yeah. So we're an very strange, different animal, I would say. we're an ecosystem for tech startups and been around for 19 years. And the whole idea with Sting is really to build a system with different components that are all supporting the goal to achieve 35 new high potential startups per year. So in that system, we have built an incubator, an accelerator, 5 co-working spaces, 1 venture capital fund, 5 angel funds, 1 large recruitment organization, etc. So we built a system with components that are all working together. And you can find bits and pieces of this in other regions around the world, but it's very difficult to find something that has all these components in one ecosystem managed in one way.
And what are some of those components? Can you share a little bit about the design?
Yeah. So one is, for instance, the accelerator. It's not a traditional accelerator program, and not exactly the same as a US-based accelerator, but it's a batch program where we take on 8 new digital startups per semester, and then we invest in them from Propel Capital. Then we have a large incubator taking on 15 companies per year, usually deep tech companies in material, robotics, biotechnology, AI, and things like that, and 15 companies per year approximately. Then we have a large recruitment organization. So we're the largest recruitment organization for startups in Sweden. We recruit 100 to 200 persons per year to our companies. And I mean, most of you probably know that startups, when they recruit, they can't go to a headhunting company, because headhunting companies, they charge far too much, and they usually don't have the candidates of this type, because we're looking for candidates that will get less salary. So a large recruitment organization. Then we have built this angel investment company structure around Sting. So we're the largest private seed investor in Sweden, doing 30 to 35 pre-seed investments per year. Another component are the co-working spaces. We have built 3 different co-working spaces in different industry verticals, because we are not operating physical offices, but we realized very early that it's very nice to have physical offices, because we like to sit together, and not right now, but otherwise. So we built 1 co-working space very much inspired by Rocket Space in San Francisco 10 years ago. That's a digital co-working space. We built 1 in digital health, and we built 1 co-working space only focusing on deep tech and material technology. So all these things are managed in 1 system, and we have added components over the years as we have needed new components. We've also actually built a quite interesting corporate startup matchmaking platform, which is now a national platform called Ignite Sweden, where we match large corporate development needs with the supply of innovations from startups.
That's great. Like showing, usually robust ecosystems have, like, those components are all separate organizations. So you're talking about you're building them. What was the strategy for you all? Like how did that come about?
It's a very good question. When I started this 2001, 2002, a couple of sort of general beliefs. One of them I had at that time was, we are going to build a system. And if you're a little bit into engineering, you know that a system is something that is built on components, but the components have to be designed together so they can achieve an overall system goal. And the only place I saw that 2001 that inspired me quite a lot, that was the systems that they built in Israel. So I spent quite a lot of time in Israel 2001 and was quite inspired by the incubator and venture capital system that they built early 2000 in Israel. And I decided, if you're going to do something here in Sweden, we must have a system approach. Otherwise, we'll just get scattered activities. So for me, a system approach has been one of the key things.
Okay. And that's so interesting, because I think it's some other ecosystems. That's what one of the things I was looking at your website, and there was a newsletter that described you all as, you know, incubator and accelerator. And then on your website, I noticed it said ecosystem, right? That there's more than just that components. I want to take a step back and hear more from Per, and how did you end up as leading Sting?
I've been in industry starting and operating companies from 81 to 99. So I've been CEO and manager in several tech companies for 18, 19 years first, after studies. I spent some time living in LA. I thought I was going to be a doctor in marketing, so I went to the doctor program to UCLA, but that was too academic to me. So I quit that after a couple of years and went back to Sweden and started working instead. But so from 81 up until 99, I've been working in tech companies, laser technologies, backbone telecom, so deep tech, material technologies, hardware things. And 1999, I had just left a big job for a turnaround of a group of 5 companies that all were sort of in really, really bad shape. And after 5 years of that turnaround assignment, I was a little bit tired and thought, let's think about what I go next. So I had a couple of weeks during that summer, 2001, and I got an offer to take on a company that was going to be listed on the stock exchange after half a year. Big, interesting, prestigious companies. And I went to my summer house a couple of weeks and thought about that and decided, no, I'm not going to do that. So instead, no, I would like to go back to the roots of business, which is startups. So 1999, I sort of left managing companies and said, no, I'm just going to work with startups. So I started work with new technology companies in 1999 in an own company, a venture firm. I started and invested some money, and I worked with 2-3 companies per year, usually deep tech things. And then 2001, I was asked by a non-profit foundation here in Stockholm. They have been developing sort of an area like it's a big science park area in Stockholm. So they asked me, could you help us to develop something that could lead to a radical increase of new startup technology companies here, because the area was 90% dominated by Ericsson. It was Ericsson, and IBM, and no under vegetation. So this foundation asked me 2001, can you come up with some sort of idea what we could do to get sort of an interesting under vegetation of new technology companies? And I said, well, I've been doing this now for 2-3 years. Give me half a year. So I went on a tour in the world and spent, as I said, quite a lot of time in Israel. I lived in the States before. I spent some time in UK, Cambridge, Lodge, and picked up bits and pieces in several countries. And then I boiled it down to a system that I suggested to this foundation. And they said, interesting. Can you do that? So in January 2002, I started building Sting, and I was on my own the first year. And now we are 17 people in the company, all entrepreneurs.
That's great. That's great. Entrepreneurs building out the ecosystem. And
Yeah.
I love that, going and traveling, taking pieces from around the world. What were some of in that exploration? Because definitely a unique insight for sure. What were some of the things that stood out among your visits to Israel, the UK, and LA and other areas?
I mean, it was different in different areas. For instance, what impressed me then, but this was many years ago, which inspired me a lot, was the business angel ecosystem around Cambridge in UK. That a really interesting and kicking and alive business angel network around the university there, and that inspired me quite a lot there. In Israel, I was fascinated by the fact that they actually taken a system approach, even from the government. They have figured out that, okay, if we're going to kickstart a startup ecosystem here in Israel, we need this, and we need this and this. Okay, how are we going to do that? So they actually draw an interesting map that led them to, they became the sort of the startup nation, and it's a book written about this. So I mainly was inspired by not the really big countries, Israel, Holland, Switzerland, companies or countries that have the same sort of strategic challenges as Sweden as a small country, because the US is so different from us. It's a big country, big domestic market. We have almost no domestic market at all. So we need to build things that go global directly because we have no domestic market.
Awesome. Yeah, that is a unique challenge. Going to the unique aspects of Stockholm, can you share a little bit about what you think makes the Stockholm entrepreneurial ecosystem unique from other areas in the world?
There's quite a number of things that is sort of behind this, and some of them are actually factors that are 100 years back. For instance, I'll give you a couple of things here. One is that the Swedish society is really built on a lot of trust, mutual trust, and trust for authorities and public services, and it's sort of a lot of trust in the society between people and organizations and things like that. And people from kindergarten are educated and sort of fostered heavily to think on their own and question. There's an interesting survey done every year, World Values Survey, where they survey values in different countries. One question there is, how often do you think that your boss is right? And that question, Sweden is rock bottom low. 7% of Swedes think that the boss is always right. And this is really positive when it comes to innovation, because people are they're taught to question. There's very low hierarchies and no sort of levels in the society. It's a very, very flat society. So people are used to think on their own, and that is very good for innovation. So that's one really important factor. And another factor, I think, is the small size of the country. We need to go outside direct, so we can't sort of rely on a big domestic market. We need to sort of think global day one. In some other European countries, at least, investors complain that some startups they don't think outside Germany because Germany is a big market enough. Then we have had this digitalization very, very early in Sweden. it's a really extremely digital society, and that has made it very easy and a good breeding ground for different types of innovations if you have a very digital society. Um, and that has been developed over sort of 30, 40 years. The government for 35 years ago installed what they call the PC reform, giving everybody in Sweden a heavy subsidized personal computer. This was 30 years ago, which made Sweden the most PC penetrated country in the world, very, very early. So people got used to very early computers. And the last 20 years, the government have really been pushing building fiber to every household. So there's a large penetration of fiber, which is very, very good for all digital services. So the matureness of digital is a very important factor. Then, of course, you shouldn't underestimate, you need champions, you need role models, and we've been lucky to have. I mean, in tennis we had Björn Borg, but in the tech sector, you need in a small country you need a couple of sort of champions, and we had pretty early we had Skype with Niklas Stenström, and then we've had a couple of others with as iSettle and Klarna and King and Mojang, and these sort of champions and role models are driving the undervegetation also. So it's sort of things like that, and the smallness of the country and the city is really, really great because it's pretty tight. Most people know each other very, very well, and it's extremely easy to communicate and get access to people.
And what is are there any unique elements you think that you've been to different entrepreneurial ecosystems? Are there any things that you had to develop to uniquely support the entrepreneurs there?
That's a very good question. If I'm going to mention a few, in Sweden compared to, for instance, United States, the university sector is very different in the way that we have something that is called the teachers exempt. That means that all researchers at university, they own the IP. In the United States, the university owns the IP produced. Mm-hmm. So that is extremely different. That means that if you're going to start a company around an innovation coming from the university, it's the researchers and doctors and things that owns the IP. But we realized very, very early that researchers usually don't become good entrepreneurs. Usually not at all. So we needed to find a way to match experienced entrepreneurs with researchers, because the researchers own the IP and perhaps develop the innovation. So we developed 8 years ago, we developed a really interesting recruitment organization to recruit experienced entrepreneurs and date them, really dating with researchers, and then build the startups around the external recruited experienced entrepreneur and have the researchers sit in the back seat. So this recruitment organization that we have is pretty unique, I think. And I have three persons working with recruitments and talent development in our team. So that I think is pretty unique. I think also this matchmaking organization that we have built between corporates and startups is pretty unique, but because now it's a national platform. So corporates sign up to this platform and we interview them and ask them, what are you actually looking for? What challenges do we have? And then when we got that, we go out in the whole 8 startups, perhaps 2 in Gothenburg, 3 in Malmö, 5 in Stockholm. And then we date these startups with a corporate. and see if they could build a proof of concept together. So it's actually helping the startups get an early verification from large corporate, and the corporate get access to a large volume of innovations from startups all over Sweden. So that's two components that I really haven't seen to that extent in other countries.
Great, thanks for sharing that. In your, when you think about in your mind, what role have you seen? I mean, of course, like unicorns coming out of the Stockholm, and you know, it sounds like you've built a robust entrepreneurial ecosystem. In your mind, what role do you see Stockholm like playing now and going forward in the European ecosystem at large?
We have a couple of advantages and sort of areas that we are trustworthy, and I think that people think that we're pretty good. And Sweden as a nation is in the forefront when it comes to reducing its CO2 footprint. There's quite a number of things going on, both in public and politically and in many other aspects, to actually really reduce and become one of the first CO2 emission-free countries. And there's one today, it's Bhutan in Himalaya. But I know that Sweden have an ambition to be one of the first CO2 neutral countries of the developed countries. And the mindset in Sweden in general among people is very positive towards this. And I think that, I mean, you can see that also from Greta Thunberg. She's just one person here that many people know about, but there's a general belief that the sustainability and reducing the CO2 footprint is an extremely important thing. And I think that Sweden can be a role model for others in all industries. So that is sort of the climate problem. I think that we'll yeah, that's, and the other thing, a more specific one is perhaps not that unique, but as I said, I would say very mature when it comes to digitalization. With the really digitalized tax file you're doing every year. I guess you do that in the United States too. You file your taxes to the authorities. In Sweden, you can agree on your yearly taxation with the authorities with an SMS. That's it. So it's a very sort of digitalized society, and I know that many other countries, at least in Europe, are looking towards Sweden when it comes. How have you become so digitalized?
Sweden has any like you started a deep tech, right? Like focus.
Yep.
Is that just Sting? Is that all of, you know, is that Sting or all of Sweden, or?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, I started there. That was, but that is not sort of the main focus area today, and not.
Are there any areas that are, you would say, like unique competitive advantages of Sweden? So in terms of industry or focus, and the reason I give a caveat, you know, in the US, like Boston is life sciences, right? Like
yeah. No, I got it. No, I would say, and
okay.
that's what's it might be sort of a strange answer, but I've been traveling quite a lot and going to different regions and countries, and what's a little bit special here, with 10 million people, and we have a really large number of Swedish large corporates here in almost all sectors. We have car companies in Sweden. developing cars, we have companies developing airplanes, we have Ericsson, we have H&M, we have IKEA, we have mining companies. We have a really wide industry sector. There is no real industry in Sweden that I would say, this is our footprint. We're really good in that. And it's the same in Stockholm. If you go to London, it's fintech and I would say ad tech and retail. There's no real such industry that is popping up here, which is the beauty, because innovations are coming out in all sectors. So the strength here is the variety. It's wrong to say that we have really much stronger in this sector now.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
I find that amazing that the support or the strategy from as a whole, as a country, has led to such a diversification of industry. And that's really unique in itself. So switching gears to current events, we all know there's a global pandemic happening. Rather than focusing on some of the challenges, because I think we're all aware of some of those. Can you share any stories of some of your portfolio companies really innovating out of in this time of crisis?
I mean, some are having headwind and some are having tailwind. But the majority of our companies are sort of in the digital space in one way or another, and many of them are actually not hit that bad. Those who are sort of hit bad, I mean, they're probably the same all over the world. I mean, it's physical retail and sports and travel and events and things like that. But if I would pick one sector, which is perhaps not unique here, but that are getting a lot of tailwind, that's sort of the digital health. We already before this crisis had quite a number of innovative digital health companies, and there's so many of them now. I mean, in all sectors, just popping up all the time. I think we have sort of 5-6 really interesting digital health companies in our portfolio right now. Investors are really looking for companies in the digital health space, and so I think that will be a strong sector for us in the future. Yeah, that's one sector.
Great. If and as you're looking at the European ecosystem, what are your thoughts on particularly the startup ecosystem in Europe in the next 12 to 18 months? What do you see? What do you see happening, and what do you think needs to help is needed to help those companies excel?
In the early phases with the startups, you're sort of either you are relying a lot on sort of the first customers to get the first paying customers to sort of get off the ground. If you haven't got that, if you're still in the development phase, you're not launched anything really yet, then you're still dependent on investors. If you're unlucky, you're dependent on both. But if you're as an ecosystem now are thinking what can you really help them with right now, then of course it's customers, and it's much more difficult today to support our companies accessing the first potential customers in other countries. So I think networks for supporting startups with early partners, the first paying customers, so industry network. I mean, it's much better to finance your companies with revenues than investments. I mean, we love revenue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, so if I was running another ecosystem, I would really think about how can we develop relations, perhaps first in our country, with companies and actors that could be our startups' first paying customers, verifying the technology or verifying the market and things like that. So that would be one thing. The other thing I would think even more about now is, with the crisis, some investors, not all, some investors are not investing any longer, but some invest still. They don't hesitate, and if you do have really good networks with the investors that are still investing, then you have a sort of competitive advantage and can support your companies better than if you don't have networks to the investors that are still there, because there are investors that are still there and do investments.
Thank you for that. And what's and before we close, can you share what's next on for Sting? What's next on the roadmap of building out the ecosystem?
We are right now planning our sort of next 10-year vision, and what we are planning now is to develop 100 new growth companies over 10 years that all are addressing the climate change problem. So we are developing now more components in our ecosystem that can back that goal, so that we can achieve 100 new growth companies in 10 years that all become pretty big companies and all are addressing the CO2 emission problem. So that's sort of the big thing we are on right now.
Got it. Well, that's an inspiring vision. But thank you, Per, for joining us today. For those watching, this was RBL1 Live, bringing a bit of flavor and perspective. So thank you very much, Per, for sharing the purpose and Sting and a little bit more about your background. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Stockholm.